Some highlights in this episode include: we are animals among other animals. This must have moral implications. Many of us are much more Christian than we would like to admit, even when we call ourselves atheists. Peter Singer is one of the most important philosophers at this moment, but he is wrong. Man is not the center of the universe, and he hates to admit that. Human life is not sacred. Sometimes it is an animal that deserves to live. Trees don't feel pain, or do they? Religion and animal rights, where do they overlap? Jede Konsequenz führt zum Teufel. Evolutionary psychology can provide a solid basis for morality. Sometimes laws are unnecessary and even harmful. Man is just an animal among other animals. That was one of the most shocking messages Darwin had to tell to humanity. And shocking it was, as for many this was hard, maybe impossible to swallow. We always thought we were closer to God than to beasts, as we, so we believed, were created according to His image. From becoming a fallen angel, Darwin makes us just a monkey, only climbing slightly higher above the other animals and doing so, becoming to dominate them. I write, teach and lecture on evolutionary psychology, and even people having no problem accepting evolution theory in general are sometimes having a real hard time accepting our mind is shaped by evolution too, as are our acts and opinions, our values and virtues, our highest ideals, and the technology and institutions we created. They are all the result of our basic drives, reflexes, and inborn instincts. People believing they are autonomous, rational, and good are time after time heavily disappointed when they realize these are just virtue signals in the game of sexual selections. Myth and illusions we like to believe because that makes it easier for us to seduce other people into believing them too. And that gives you an edge in being chosen as mating or cooperation partners, the two ultimate criteria for evolutionary success. So, for some people, reading about evolutionary psychology is not the big fun it is for you and for me. But if we are animals among animals, when we acknowledge our anthropocentrism is just a residue of our ancient Christian heritage, of little worth anymore for most of us as atheist and secularized modern people, doesn't this mean for one thing we shouldn't treat animals fundamentally different than we do now or did in the past? If us having souls or being soulless equals the souls or soullessness of animals, shouldn't that mean they have equal rights to humans? Shouldn't we treat them as moral equal companions? And what about robots? They get more advanced every year. Maybe there comes a time when they can think and feel just like we do. Or when the personality of a human person is downloaded in a computer to continue his life this way. Does it make this machine having the same rights as the biological machine it housed in before? These are all very intriguing questions, and I want to discuss and maybe answer some of them for a small part in this episode on evolutionary psychology. For this, I lean heavily on the ideas and readings of the brilliant and provocative Australian philosopher Peter Singer. On many points, I don't agree with him, but his ideas force you to take a stance. So they are really great grindstones to sharpen your ideas, fundamental beliefs and ways of thinking. But first a disclaimer. The fact I will disagree on many of Singer's ideas doesn't mean we as humans can do whatever we want to animals and ecosystems. We do have the obligation to treat animals as humane as possible. But at the same time, we do have the right to use them for our advantage when necessary. Think of the cattle we use for meat and milk. Of course, I will clarify this viewpoint in what follows next. But back to Singer. He coined the term speciesism. Sexism is the idea one gender is superior to the other one, and therefore should enjoy special rights and privileges. Racism is the same idea, applied to differences between ethnic groups, often associated with the idea racial groups differ fundamentally on a biological, intellectual and moral level. Singer adds to this the logical next step to stop thinking we as humans are so special and we have special rights, privileges or intrinsic worth separating us from all other living creatures. As racism and sexism are morally condemned in our modern Western society, speciesism is not. That is, until a few years from now. Singer is convinced speciesism will end up in the same category of taboos as sexism and racism are in. In a way, Singer gives the fourth blow to our much cherished sense of uniqueness. First there was Galileo, proclaiming the Earth is not in the center of the universe, making its inhabitants, meaning us, a little bit less special. Next, Darwin told us we are just animals and we evolved from ape-like ancestors. The third strike came from Sigmund Freud. He shattered our belief we are autonomous individuals with a free will. Freud stated our conscious thoughts and decisions are fundamentally steered by unconscious, sometimes beastly and perverse, instincts, fears, thoughts and drives, of which we know very little and which greatly fall outside the realm of influence. What about the fourth blow, the one from Peter Singer? Will we stand tall, or will it knock us down definitely, never to stand up again? And how will this shape our fundamental ideas we hold about ourselves? Singer starts by asking, what is it that makes us uniquely human? What does separate us from all other creatures and legitimizes the special rights and privileges we have granted ourselves? Is it our intelligence, our ability to think? No, strictly speaking not. Other animals like chimps and dolphins show remarkable high levels of reasoning abilities too. Of course, as a group, as a species, we are more intelligent than any other species of animals. But within the groups, IQ shows a very broad bell curve distribution. Some people are less intelligent than some animals. Think of a baby, a heavily retarded person, or someone with severe brain damage. Does such a person have less rights than an adult, healthy individual? Is it allowed to set different ethical standards the way we treat people with a high IQ in contrast with people with lower IQs? On economic aspects we surely do. With a high IQ you often earn more money than someone with a low IQ. But moral, ethical and concerning equality for the law, we do not make this distinction. Is that correct? Or should we change this fundamental principle of ethics? Singer makes a provocative statement it should be better to use a human person in coma, of which doctors are sure he will never recover, or a baby born without a brain, instead of a healthy, intelligent, conscious 10-year-old chimpanzee, when you have to decide on which subject to conduct heavily invasive but highly important medical experiments. Especially if you take in consideration the next criterion, the ability to suffer. The famous philosopher René Descartes believed animals didn't experience any pain. The screaming of a dog he nailed on a table to life dissect it were in his eyes just mechanical reflexes. He compared to the sounds of a badly oiled machine. Luckily, we are not that cruel anymore. But are we up to accepting sometimes the life of an animal has to be put above the life of a human being? According to Singer, we should. Consciousness, the ability to experience pain and pleasure, the ability to make willful choices are what matters, regardless of the species involved. Fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals do feel pain. Research on the brain reactions leaves no doubt about this. But in daily reality, we attribute quite different traits on different animals with regard to their ability to suffer pain. In most cases, this has to do with the way a species communicates pain. When a dog feels pain, he shows this in a way easy to understand for us. So we empathize much more with our dearest friend. A bird or a fish, when wounded, often doesn't scream, nor has it the ability to show its inner state by facial expressions we understand. Therefore, we are inclined to think it doesn't suffer, while in fact it does. On the other hand, philosopher Daniel Dennett once conducted an ingenious experiment to show we sometimes attribute feelings of pain to subjects where there are obviously none. He made little robots with cute faces and big baby-like eyes. He asked subjects to destroy these things. But when hit by a hammer, they were programmed to make high-pitched sounds just like a conscious animal or human child does. Although the subjects knew rationally these were just machines, most of them blocked and couldn't go on destroying the little non-living machines. Our ability to empathize and our TOM, theory of mind, tricked us. But what, we already mentioned this issue, if machines become so complex they experience thoughts and emotions undistinguishable from our own, or when their nervous systems functionally become exact copies of our brains? That would lead to a revolution in ethics. Maybe we expand vastly the boundaries of what we define as us, or we will fall back in dark forms of slavery and colonialism, abusing sensing and conscious beings just for our own comforts and pleasures. The new class of mechanical slaves. Who will tell? But back to nowadays reality. Higher animals do feel pain. Crabs, lobsters and shrimps do have nervous systems quite different from ours, but you can safely assume they can feel pain too, observing their reactions. Octopuses are highly intelligent, even more than a dog or a cat, so we don't have to doubt about their ability to feel pain. Oysters and mollusks, on the other hand, probably don't feel pain the way our other animals do. As a rule of thumb, we could say the more options they have to react on pain, like fighting, fleeing, hiding, bluffing, etc., the more their nervous system is attuned to operating these reactions, and an integral part of this is the sense and conscious experiencing of pain and discomfort. Therefore, although I cannot prove it, I think trees and other plants don't feel pain. What's the use of it when you cannot run away? In evolution, function and structure are always tightly aligned, so feeling without consequences are useless. But back again to our friend Peter Singer. I hope you have noticed he's a speciesist himself too. Why? For one, he takes humans as the golden standards and allows other creatures rights to the degree they match with us. Compare this to a white supremacist only granting black people civil rights to the degree they live as he does, to the degree they copy his way of life. If elephants would be at the top of creation, they would judge other animals by having or not having a trunk. They would maybe look down on us because of our pathetically short noses. Up until now, we analyze things on the level of concrete individuals. A completely different approach will be to consider the well-being of the supersystem as the ultimate criterion. Ecologist Aldo Leopold talks of deep ecology. In earlier episodes in this series, the ones on religion, we talked about the idea we are all part of a bigger organism, you can call Gaia or God. Serving the system is the highest level of morality. We are bees in a beehive, and the colony is of much more importance than the lives or well-being of the individual parts of it. They are replaceable, the whole is not. Thinking this way, you can of course discuss how far the boundaries of God are stretching. When encompassing the whole of nature, we could even say humanity is a commutable part of it. Nature can well do without us, and the functions we perform and that are really essential can easily be taken over by other natural systems. A bit smaller, we could define God as human society, seen on a global scale. The better angels of the Abrahamic religions, Buddhism, Hinduism and other religions, take this as their central viewpoint. What to do to serve humanity in an optimal way. What constitutes the good life for most people, now and in the future. When you think of that, you end up by spreading the good elements of Western culture, as originated from Christianity, the Enlightenment, humanism and the movement for universal human rights. This also entails care for our environment and striving for sustainability. You want to know more about this idea? Have a look at, for example, the episodes 20, 25, 31 and 34. But mind you, this leaves us some very tough contradictions to solve. It's easy, when asked the question, to save the life of a common pig or cow versus the life of a near extinct species like an individual rhino, blue whale or panda bear. Everyone will choose to have the rhino, whale and panda live. But what about the Mona Lisa versus the life of a random human being? Or that of a mental disabled, paralyzed child suffering and only expected to live a year or so? And do we value the life of a Nobel Prize winner more than the life of an addicted criminal in bad physical and mental shape? Does your role in society dictate your worth? Or does every human have an unannihilated intrinsic value? And if so, what other animals have that too? You see, serving God is not easy. The Bible itself describes it as an everlasting form of wrestling with reality. Many philosophers are vague. They pose a lot of questions but never give clear answers. Not so Peter Singer. He makes crystal clear statements about what is right and what is wrong. Although in many cases I do not agree with him, I really appreciate the thinker for his decisiveness. You know what you are discussing, and it forces you to choose a clear position yourself. For example, for Singer there is no fundamental difference between human and animal suffering. He is a utilitarianist. What to do to minimize all suffering in the world and promote all well-being, making no distinctions between the subject of the suffering. For him, there is no clear distinction between human and animal life, as there is no distinction between unborn life and life just outside the womb of the mother. If you allow abortion, you should also allow the ending of life of handicapped babies after they have been born. If medical experiments are needed to enhance the total well-being on Earth, okay, but use some humans, people in coma, children born with no brain, a terminal patient, as guinea pigs instead of a healthy, conscious chimp. Singer is very robust and consequent in his line of thinking. He starts with some axioms and brings them to their ultimate consequences. Not many thinkers show this consistency and courage he does. I agree on his idea we should work hard to make people and animals suffer less than they do right now. But let's discuss some points I do not agree with. You will discover they mostly having to do with Singer neglecting some basic facts of life as demonstrated by evolutionary psychology. Take for example inclusive fitness, the idea I value my own genes above the ones of a stranger, let alone the ones of another species. Furthermore, I share some of my genes with my close relatives, my brothers, sisters and my children. So their well-being towers far above the well-being of a complete stranger in a faraway country. One could say this is immoral and that civilization is precisely about suppressing these so-called lower instincts, and it's better, morally more virtuous, to live according to a set of rational, humane and universal principles. Problem with this kind of virtue signaling is it will never stand the storms of reality. Intellectuals with no skin in the game can tell you how to live, but always doubt their words until they have demonstrated in real life conditions they themselves can do and will do it. And even if they can, will this guarantee vast numbers of average human beings will follow their example? So, can ideas really be made practical without causing disaster in other domains of life? An illuminating example of this is William McCaskill. I don't know of course what he does in private life, and he is undoubtedly a nice guy, but in his book on effective altruism he makes statements like it's immoral to spend $100 on luxury items for your own child instead of spending this amount of money on saving 5 children in Africa that could be vaccinated at this cost. To me, this is where rational and moral thinking becomes a thing of its own, disconnected from real world. Jede Konsequenz führt zum Teufel, they say in Germany, meaning every idea taken to its ultimate consequences leads to hell. What would happen if we really tried to practice these kinds of ideas, stretched to their ultimate consequences? How would society function in such a set of conditions? Well, we know it has been tried. Think for example on the experiments with communism, where by law everyone was declared equal and your family had no rights to a special treatment by you. Did this make people happy? No, it simply didn't work. And in trying to make it work anyhow, tens of millions of people got killed, sometimes in the most horrific of circumstances. The goal of maximizing overall well-being ended in the exact opposite. So think again if these philosophers propose to try a new experiment again. I, for sure, am not too keen to participate in it. If the suffering of every creature is the same and all have the same rights, Does this mean they have the same obligations too? If we are stopped from killing animals, should lions and other predators be forced to do so too? Do we have to capture all wild animals and force the meat eaters on a substitute diet of plant-based nutrients? Is a wolf guilty of murder when he kills a deer? Do I, as a sentient being, have the obligation to prevent the wolf from killing the deer? I do think you agree with me. Of course not. This would be ridiculous and impossible to implement. So always think of the practical consequences of ideas. And when replied, you are making a caricature of it, just ask, but where would your line of reasoning stop? Are there limits on applying these ideas? If yes, why precisely on that point and not some other point? Doing so, you will discover their reasoning isn't quite as rational and consistent as it appears at first sight. When reality and ideas clash, it's always wise to examine the ideas more closely to see if they are as valid as appeared on first sight. When, for example, dive deeper into the pedigree of ideas like Singer and McGaskill promote, you probably find the origins in, among others, Christian ways of thinking. Most religions before Christianity were particular instead of universal. They favored one group above all others. Think of the Jewish people, believing they were the chosen tribe, chosen by God, and they had a special place on earth. Jesus Christ was one of the first to state all people were equal in the eyes of the Lord. He preached universalism. The common man, the Gentile, is loved by God in the same way as a Jew or Christian is. In secular forms, we see this idea emerging in humanism and the striving for universal human rights. Proclaiming animals have rights too is a logical next or ultimate step in this idea. So even people proclaiming they are atheists often are under a much stronger spell of old religion's ideas than they realize or want to admit. But detach yourself from these dogmatic residues and ask yourself if these ideas are right and valid, and what would happen if we really would implement them. Another line in the mimetic origins of these ideas we find in what we could call toxic femininity. Like masculinity can become toxic masculinity when its internal balance gets lost, so can femininity become toxic femininity. If empathy and caring is not counterbalanced by other forces and values, it tends to see victims everywhere. And victims need caring and protection, and they are always right, whenever and whatever, regardless the costs and consequences. Toxic femininity is one of the core elements in modern woke culture, where everything that is opposed to the masculine, white, heterosexual capitalist male is seen as good and virtuous. Animals by nature include this category. So again, ask yourself what would be the practical consequences of implementing these toxic ideas, and then decide if they are valid and worth supporting or not. But what if the ideas of Singer, Christianity or the woke are not right? Which system of moral rules is? Do we have a solid ground to base our moral judgments on? Indeed there is. You might not be surprised if I say the evolutionary ones. Evolution has shaped a set of moral emotions that has served us well for millions of years. And by basing formal ethics on intuitive or evolutionary ethics, we get a much more robust stronghold in comparison to relying on ethics that are not aligned with our basic nature. Think of Christianity. Everyone knows there's a huge gap between what is preached in churches and what people actually do in daily life. We have learned to live with this schizophrenia, but I hope you will agree with me we are better off without this gap, and this can only be done by morally based on evolutionary knowledge. And these evolutionary ethics are based on two solid rocks, and that is all what we need. And what are these foundations? Well, you probably have heard about them many times in this series. Inclusive fitness and reciprocity. Inclusive fitness was the start of cooperation on a real advanced level, but it has limited itself to genetic relatives. In small family groups like humans and wolves, this is enough. In bigger forms of organization, for example in chiefdoms and countries, we cannot do without the second one, reciprocity. You do something for me and I will do something for you. Reciprocity is the basis for grand-scale cooperation, of trade and of division of labor and specialization, of skills and competencies. The science of economics is all about this intriguing phenomenon. It's about enlightened egoism. It's about the journey of the selfish gene, pictured so brilliantly by Richard Dawkins. It's about capitalism and the wealth and prosperity it created. For more details, have a look at, for example, the episodes 1, 2, and 27. Cooperation is an intriguing subject to study. From some simple axioms, a wealth of awe-inspiring complexity has arisen. Not only is it demonstrated by the power of capitalism, giving more wealth and prosperity to more people than ever seen in history before, it's also the driving force behind moral and ethic systems like mutual help, empathy, love, friendship, loyalty, having proud feelings about one's country, self-sacrifice, and many more qualities we encounter in humans. For some, it's hard to swallow contradiction that egoism can be the prime cause, the foundation of wonderful ethic system. Bernard Mandeville talked about private vices and public benefits. When you grab the essence of this powerful idea, you don't need any supranational fairy tales to make you behave good and to understand why this leads to a just society. But how do non-human entities like animals, plants and ecosystems fit into this idea? Well, obviously, caring for them is also caring for ourselves. If we pollute our environment, waste natural resources, eliminate ecological diversity, this will ultimately harm us too. And if not us, it will destroy our children and children's children. Sustainability and environmental care are ultimately rational, selfish choices, but precisely the one we need right now. Man, being the most intelligent creature, he can use his superior imagination to project scenarios into a distant future, seeing what causes of action will bring us the most good and the least evil. So, the brightest among us have to lead the way, and we should watch them not abusing their power. And if we cherish them, they will. Noblesse oblige. Trusting evolutionary ethics means we don't have to regulate and control everything into every little detail. Every person knows what to do, as long as he's provided with the needed information. So instead of using force in making ever more complex systems of regulations and laws, it's better to educate people so they themselves will make the right decisions in relation to treating animals right, protecting the ecosystem and living in a sustainable way. In many countries we see a trend to codify everything into laws. The right on abortion, LGBTQ rights, and some want animals, rivers and ecosystems granted legal rights too, which in itself is of course a silly idea, as they see this as the only route to a just society. In their view, everything should be fixed in rules, regulations and laws, even into constitutional rules. Mind you, this is a case of extreme lack of trust in future generations. So I say, don't think you have to think for them. They can make the right decisions given the time and circumstances by then. Trust them. So we better stick to Darwinian ethics. In essence, it's an act of faith to do so. To believe super systems are self-organizing entities with unimaginable powers to solve their own problems. And we as subsystems in this play a vital role in doing so. But hey, didn't old spiritual texts already mention something like this for many thousands of years? Yes, I think they did. Okay folks, that was it for today. I hope it gives you something to reflect on. See you on my next video.